She walked into that courtroom with quiet grace, but within minutes, everything would spiral. A cop's mistake, a power misjudged, and a witness list far longer than expected. What happens when the person you thought you could intimidate turns out to hold your future in their hands? Let us know in the comments section below. The first thing you noticed about Danielle Monroe wasn't her robe. It wasn't the gavel. It wasn't even the polished heels clicking down the hallway with the steadiness of someone who'd memorized every step of power. It was her eyes. Still, focused. The kind of eyes that studied the truth beneath someone's words. Eyes that could see the difference between performance and principle, and had spent 20 years proving she wouldn't bow to either. She adjusted the collar of her judge's robe as she stepped through the side entrance of courtroom 6B. The courtroom was quiet. The bailiff stood by the door. The clerks rustled papers without looking up. And at the far end, her bench, elevated, framed by the seal of the state of North Carolina behind it. Danielle took a slow breath, steadying herself before stepping into place. She didn't look like someone who would change the entire direction of a city that day, but in a system built to strip power from women like her, her mere presence was revolutionary. In the gallery, a few rows of benches were already filled. Community members, a young public defender with a stack of overstuffed case files, a white man in a navy blue suit tapping his pen nervously. Danielle scanned the room as she took her seat. That's when the door opened again. Officer Tricia Lenz walked in like she owned the floor beneath her. Square jaw, pressed uniform, and a smirk that had gotten her out of more complaints than she could count. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. She didn't need to. The sound of her boots echoed too loudly on the wooden floor, a sound that had come to mean trouble in neighborhoods that looked like Danielle's. She was escorting a young black man in handcuffs. Thin, maybe 19, head down, eyes tired. His name was Andre Bell, and he had been arrested the night before on charges that read longer than his rap sheet ever deserved. Danielle didn't flinch. She never did, but inside something bristled. Andrea was seated beside his public defender. Officer Lenz stood nearby, her arms crossed. No effort to hide her boredom, no recognition in her expression. That would prove to be her second mistake. The first came earlier that week, when she submitted a false report and assumed no one would notice. Danielle cleared her throat. Court is now in session. The next few minutes moved like routine. Names called, motions filed. Danielle nodded along, taking mental notes, even as her clerk handled paperwork. Then the Bell case was called. State of North Carolina versus Malik Bell, the clerk announced. Andre rose, chained at the wrists, barely lifting his eyes. Danielle looked at him, then at the paper before her. Mr. Bell, you're charged with obstruction, resisting arrest, and assaulting a law enforcement officer. How do you plead? Not guilty, his attorney said quickly. Danielle's eyes flicked up. And the arresting officer? That would be me, Your Honor, Officer Lenz said, stepping forward. And for the first time their eyes met. Danielle studied her, calmly, silently. Lenz didn't blink, didn't falter, but she didn't recognize the woman behind the bench. That would be her third mistake. Very well, Danielle said. Let's review the arrest report. Lenz stepped toward the bench, pulling a file from her belt. Danielle held out her hand for it. Lenz didn't move faster. In fact, she looked annoyed, like this was beneath her. Then, without warning, the sound cracked through the courtroom like a thunderclap. It was fast, a blur. Tricia Lenz reached to hand over the report but misstepped, her hands swinging too hard, and with a backhand motion the report struck Danielle across the face. Gasps broke out like sirens. The courtroom froze. The bailiff stood, hand on his holster. The young attorney's mouth dropped open. Someone in the back whispered, "Did she just?" Lenz's eyes widened for a split second before narrowing again, trying to cover it up. "It was an accident," she muttered, too quickly. Danielle hadn't moved. The silence felt like an explosion. Then, calmly, she set the report on her desk, straightened her robe, and said, without raising her voice, "Officer Lenz." "Step back." But Lenz didn't move. Her jaw tensed. The weight of what she'd done hadn't fully landed yet. Not in her mind. Not the way it had landed in the hearts of the people watching. Danielle didn't blink. "You will remove yourself from this courtroom, now." Tricia scoffed. "I didn't mean to. That wasn't a request." A new voice cut in. It came from the back. "I got that on video," someone shouted, holding up their phone. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Phones were up now, angles pointed forward. This was no longer a minor incident. It had become a public spectacle. Danielle rose from her chair, slowly, with intention. And now Lenz stepped back. The bailiff moved forward. The clerk stood frozen, uncertain, but Danielle, steady as ever, turned toward the rows of eyes watching her. Some filled with outrage, others with awe. "This courtroom will recess," she said quietly. No one moved. No one could. Danielle left the bench. In the hallway, as the heavy doors closed behind her, her heart thudded hard against her chest. She touched her cheek, not from pain, but from the sharp heat of humiliation, of fury, not at being hit, but at being treated as invisible in a space where she'd carved her name into the foundation. Behind her, Officer Lenz stood surrounded. The cameras were still rolling. The tide was already turning. And though no one could see it yet, the first brick of her empire had already begun to fall. The video hit social media before Danielle even reached her chambers. It was blurry at first, shaky hands and whispered gasps. But the sound was clear. The slap. The stunned silence. The unshakable voice of a judge commanding authority from the wreckage of disrespect. Within 10 minutes, it was everywhere. Cop slaps black judge in courtroom. Accident or abuse of power. Hashtags trended before court resumed. Judge Monroe, courtroom assault. Respect the robe. By noon, Danielle's inbox was flooded. Reporters, law clerks, civil rights lawyers. Some wanted statements, others wanted interviews. But most just wanted to say something she hadn't heard in a while. "We see you." She sat behind her desk, hands clasped in front of her lips, trying not to let the headlines distract her. There was still court to run. Justice doesn't get to take lunch breaks, not for women like her. Especially not today. There was a knock at her office door. "Come in," she said softly. It creaked open to reveal Amara, a young legal aide with nerves too raw for the day she was having. She held her phone in one hand and a stack of court dockets in the other. "Ma'am," Amara said, eyes wide, "this is going viral." Danielle nodded without looking up. "So I've heard." "She hit you. And people are watching it like it's a TikTok prank, like it's a moment of drama instead of violence." Danielle finally looked at her, her voice low and even. "Do you know what happens when we panic, Amara?" Amara hesitated. "We lose our power." "Exactly." She stood, motioning toward the window. Outside, the courthouse steps had gathered a small crowd. Activists, community members, even a few city employees who had quietly stepped away from their desks to watch history unfold. "This isn't about me," Danielle said. "It's about what she thought she could get away with, and how many people let her believe she could." Amara took a breath. "Officer Lenz is still on the floor. I don't think she's been asked to leave the building." Danielle's brow furrowed. "She wasn't escorted out?" "No, ma'am." That was all Danielle needed to hear. She left her office without another word. The hallway outside courtroom 6B was colder than she remembered. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way everyone avoided eye contact. Court officers, admin staff, even a few fellow judges who'd peeked out of their doors only to retreat when they saw her coming. But she didn't shrink. She never did. When she turned the corner, she spotted Officer Lenz leaning against the wall near a water fountain, arms folded like this was a school hallway, and she was waiting for the bell. Danielle stopped in front of her. "You still here?" Lenz stood up straighter. "Yes, ma'am. Waiting for internal affairs to call." Danielle studied her. "You understand the gravity of what you did." "It was an accident," Lenz said quickly. Too quickly. "I've already written a report." Danielle narrowed her gaze. "This isn't about paperwork. You raised your hand to a sitting judge in a courtroom. On the record, on video, in uniform. That's not an accident. That's a pattern." Lenz blinked. "I don't know what you mean. You've been written up 4 times for excessive force, and yet here you are, still on duty, still collecting a paycheck, still being protected." The hallway grew tighter. "I've seen your records," Danielle continued. "You know how many of your victims were white?" Lenz didn't respond. "That's what I thought." Behind them, more staff had gathered, listening without pretending otherwise. Danielle stepped closer. "You disrespected this robe. But more than that, you disrespected the people who believe in this system, the kids who walk into this courthouse thinking someone in here might finally hear them. You disrespected them." Lenz exhaled, trying to reassert herself. "So, what? You want me fired?" Danielle paused, her voice soft. "No." Lenz tilted her head, surprised. "I don't want you fired," Danielle said. "I want the system that made you believe you could behave this way to be dismantled. I want your supervisors held accountable. I want every silent officer who watched you do worse and said nothing to testify. I want truth." Lenz didn't speak. She couldn't. The power she thought she held was slipping fast, and the woman in front of her wasn't moving. Danielle turned to Amara. "Call Chief Robeson. Tell him if she's not suspended by the end of the day, I will be calling a press conference in this building at 5 p.m., and I won't be alone." Amara nodded and rushed off. Lenz stood frozen. Danielle took one last look at her. You don't slap a black woman in a courtroom and expect the world to stay quiet anymore. Then she walked away. Back in the courtroom, murmurs had turned into strategy. Community members were already organizing. Local lawyers huddled outside, passing around printouts of complaints filed against Lenz in the past. Danielle saw one woman, a mother whose teenage son had been brutalized during a traffic stop, crying softly while clutching her phone. Watching the video again and again, and in that moment Danielle knew this was bigger than her bench, bigger than her title. This was about years of whispered pain finally making noise. The city council issued a brief statement around 3 p.m., calling the incident deeply troubling and vowing to support a full investigation. But people weren't interested in promises anymore. They wanted action. By 4:15, a protest had begun forming outside the courthouse. Peaceful but forceful. Signs lifted, names chanted. One of the posters read, "Not one more." Inside, Danielle reviewed motions, signed orders, and continued to preside over a broken system with steady hands. But underneath it all, something had cracked, and not in her, but in the machinery that had once ignored voices like hers. At 4:58, a reporter from WRCN News stood on the courthouse steps, microphone in hand. "We are moments away from what could be a historic press conference. The question on everyone's mind: will Judge Danielle Monroe speak publicly?" Danielle stood just behind the double doors, watching the crowd through the slats. She could hear them now. Not yelling, not rioting, just present, unmoved, alive with rage and hope and something else. Clarity. She turned to Amara. "Is Officer Lenz still here?" "She's gone, placed on immediate leave. Internal affairs confirmed." Danielle nodded once. She stepped out. The crowd quieted. 100 eyes locked on her. The air felt electric, like the world had been waiting for a moment like this. Danielle stepped up to the microphones, placed both hands on the podium, and let the silence stretch for one long, perfect moment. She looked out, not just at the people, but at the city. And in that pause, in that breathless stillness, the empire of silence finally began to tremble. The morning after the press conference, the courthouse didn't sound the same. Normally, it opened with a slow rhythm, keys rattling, papers shuffling, the low hum of vending machines in the hallway. But not today. Today, the hallways buzzed with whispers. People didn't walk past each other without noticing. They didn't keep their heads down. They looked. They stared. Some nodded in quiet respect when Judge Danielle Monroe walked past. Others said nothing, unsure if silence meant loyalty or fear. Danielle moved through it all with the same grace as always, but something in her had shifted. Her heels struck the floor like punctuation marks, full stops between every assumption anyone had ever made about who held power here. She had been calm. She had been composed. She had stayed dignified, even with the sting of Officer Lenz's slap still fresh on her cheek. But dignity didn't mean dormant, and today was proof. As she stepped into her chambers, the morning light hit her nameplate, gold, engraved, centered on the door. She paused for a second, ran her fingers across the letters. Not because she needed to remind herself who she was, but because she finally felt the city beginning to see it too. Amara was already inside, pacing. "They've opened an inquiry," she said without preamble. "The department, Civilian Review Board too, and it's spreading fast. 3 former officers have already come forward with new complaints about Lenz, stuff from years ago." Danielle set her bag down. "Years ago?" "Yeah, buried stuff. Body cams that malfunctioned, reports that mysteriously disappeared. One guy even said Internal Affairs never interviewed him after he filed. Just a written statement and silence." Danielle shook her head. "Silence is policy." "Not anymore." Amara held up her tablet, showing Danielle a stream of posts, tweets, headlines, clips of the slap slowed down and looped, but that wasn't the part that made Danielle pause. It was the comments. "She's what real justice looks like. Why do they only respect the robe when it's not on a black woman?" That judge didn't flinch. That's power. Danielle stared for a moment before sliding the tablet back. "They're not wrong. But they're also just waking up. I've been doing this job for 15 years. But now they're listening." Danielle nodded, lips tight. She didn't like the way power only seemed to respond to pain, but she knew how to work with momentum when it arrived, and it had arrived. Outside her chambers, the courtroom was filling early. Reporters weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop them from lingering near the entrance, cameras ready the second she stepped into view. Activists gathered again on the courthouse lawn, this time with megaphones and water bottles. It wasn't a protest anymore. It was a movement. And at the center of it, Danielle didn't want to become a symbol. She wanted results. She stepped into courtroom 6B just before the 9 a.m. calendar call. The room was packed, not with spectators, but with purpose. Public defenders, law clerks, junior attorneys, many of them black or brown, watching her like she was rewriting the rules in real time. Danielle didn't address the crowd. She took her seat. She tapped the gavel. Court is now in session. The first few cases proceeded as usual. Routine hearings, continuances, bond reviews. But there was a tension under the surface, the kind of tension that builds when people are waiting for a crack to spread into a collapse. It came just before noon. A new motion was filed by the district attorney's office, one Danielle hadn't been briefed on. Amara passed the paperwork to her silently. It was a motion to seal all records relating to Officer Lenz's use of force complaints. Danielle read it twice, then a third time. The DA's rep stood at the podium, adjusting her glasses. "Your Honor," she began, "given the sensitivity of the ongoing investigation and the heightened media attention, We believe it would serve the interest of all parties involved to prevent prejudicial exposure." Danielle cut her off. "So you want to protect the officer's reputation from the public?" "Not just hers," the woman replied. "The department's as a whole." Danielle leaned back in her chair, the weight of the motion settling in her chest. "I find it interesting," she said, "that concern for reputation only surfaces after a black woman in a robe gets slapped on camera. Where was this concern when people were filing complaints and getting no response, when footage went missing, when victims were told to drop it or risk retaliation?" The courtroom was dead silent. "I won't seal those records," she said firmly. The DA stuttered. "Your Honor, this is about integrity." "No, this is about damage control, and this court won't be part of it." Her gavel struck once, hard. The echo rang out like a drumbeat. Motion denied. From the back row, someone clapped once, then another, then a few more. Danielle raised her hand slightly and the room fell silent again. She didn't need applause. She needed accountability. By the afternoon recess, the walls of the courthouse had started to feel smaller. Lenz's attorney had filed a restraining order against the media, not Danielle. But even that was beginning to unravel. Former colleagues were surfacing faster than anyone expected, sharing screenshots, emails, text threads. A retired sergeant from another precinct went on record about Lenz tampering with a suspect's testimony. An ex-boyfriend came forward with photos showing bruises, broken furniture, and threatening voicemails. The empire she had built on fear and silence was now showing its cracks. Danielle returned to her chambers for a short break, eyes tired but steady. She sat at her desk, opened a folder of old notes, and stared at the one name she hadn't forgotten. Shane Garvey. He was 16 when Officer Lenz tackled him outside a bodega, said he fit a description, left him with a fractured collarbone. No charges were ever filed. Danielle remembered the day the case hit her desk. She had asked for body cam footage. It was missing. She had asked for witness statements. Redacted. She had even tried to speak directly to Shane's mother, but the call was rerouted, then dropped. Danielle had always suspected something deeper was at play. Now she had proof. She picked up the phone. "Amara? Find Shane Garvey. Or his family. I want them here tomorrow morning." Amara didn't ask why. She didn't need to. Danielle hung up and leaned back in her chair. For the first time in a long time, she felt the system wasn't just bending, it was starting to break where it needed to. And she wasn't going to stop until it fell in the right direction. The courtroom was standing room only. The buzz started before sunrise. Neighbors, lawyers, pastors, students, all drifting toward the courthouse as if pulled by some invisible cord. By 8 a.m., the line stretched around the block. Local coffee shops gave out free drinks to anyone headed to that hearing. The street outside had transformed from quiet civic space into something alive and breathing. Inside, Judge Danielle Monroe stood at the window of her chambers, looking down at the growing crowd. She wasn't smiling, not yet, but her face held something softer than it had in days, something close to peace. Amara entered holding a folder. "They're here," she said. "Shane Garvey, his mom, and about 50 people who say they've waited years for someone to say their names out loud." Danielle turned, nodding. "Bring Shane in first." Moments later, a tall young man walked in, eyes cautious, hands jammed into his jacket pockets. He wasn't a boy anymore. Taller now, broader in the shoulders. But there was still something small in the way he looked around the room, like he didn't trust he was safe yet. Danielle stood. "Shane," she said, "thank you for coming." He didn't speak right away. His gaze moved over the room, taking in the books, the bench in the corner, the framed family photo on her desk. "My mom said you tried to help," he finally said. "Back then, I didn't believe her." "That's okay," Danielle replied. "I wouldn't have either." Jane took a step forward. "You gonna say my name in court today?" "Yes," she said. And not just yours. A flicker of something, recognition, maybe pride, passed through his face. Then he nodded. When Shane left, Danielle sat alone for a few minutes longer. She thought about every name that had never made it into a courtroom. Every young man who'd been stopped, cuffed, humiliated, then released with no apology. Every girl frisked for officer safety, only to walk away with shame tucked into her sleeve like a ticket she didn't ask for. Today was for them. By 9:02 a.m., she took her seat on the bench. Courtroom 6B felt like the floor beneath it was waiting to rise. "I'll rise," the bailiff called. Danielle lifted her gavel, tapped it once. Court is now in session. The first order of business was the hearing on the motion to unseal disciplinary records, not just for Officer Lenz, but for any officer with 3 or more excessive force complaints within the last 5 years. The DA's office had fought to narrow the scope. Danielle expanded it. "There is no justice in secrecy," she said. "There is only shadow." Next came the Garvey case. Danielle opened the file as if she were holding something sacred. She read aloud from the complaint filed 4 years earlier, described the incident in full detail, recounted Shane's injuries, the hospital bill his mother had to take out a loan to pay, the way his scholarship application was later denied due to pending legal concerns. No one breathed. Then she read from a new report, one compiled by a retired detective who had worked quietly in the background since the press conference. His findings were damning. Officer Lenz had filed 14 reports over her career that omitted or misrepresented the race of the suspect. 3 audio recordings revealed her using racial slurs. 2 videos showed unnecessary physical force, one of them against a child. Danielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Truth doesn't shout. It resonates. When she finished reading, she closed the file slowly and set it down. "I hereby move to forward this case to the State Attorney's Office with a formal recommendation that criminal charges be pursued against Officer Tricia Lenz for misconduct, perjury, and obstruction of justice." A ripple moved through the room, small at first, then swelling like a wave. She turned to Shane, seated in the front row. "I'm sorry it took this long," she said. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. By noon, the governor had issued a statement. The attorney general followed suit within the hour. Lenz had officially been charged, stripped of her badge, and placed under investigation for at least 3 past incidents. Now reopened under the pressure of public demand, but Danielle wasn't done. After the lunch recess, she called an unexpected hearing. People who had already left work that morning returned. Word spread quickly. She had more to say. Danielle stood, not behind her bench but on the floor of the courtroom, eye level with the community she served. "I was raised by a woman who cleaned office buildings at night and braided my hair in the morning," she began. "She used to say, 'The system doesn't see you, baby, so you have to make them look.'" She paused. "Well, I think they're looking now." Laughter broke out, soft, warm, like it belonged there. Danielle continued. "For years, we have operated as if justice were a ladder and black and brown folks were born at the bottom rung. But what if we've been building the wrong structure altogether? What if justice isn't something you climb, but something you build, together, with level ground and honest hands?" The courtroom was quiet again. "I'm not here to be a symbol," she said. "I'm here to do my job, and if this job means tearing down walls to rebuild what's right, then I will." She turned toward the crowd. "Starting next week, I'll be leading a committee for independent police oversight, composed of citizens, not politicians. Every person who files a complaint will have a right to a hearing, and every officer will know they are accountable not just to their badge, but to the people." Cheers erupted. For once, the walls of 6B held joy instead of dread. Outside, the crowd had swelled again. Students held signs that read, "Danielle speaks, we rise." Local business owners passed out sandwiches and cold water. A man from a nearby church set up speakers and played Marvin Gaye on repeat. It wasn't just a gathering. It was a celebration. Daniel stepped outside later that day, escorted by no one, flanked only by the sunlight that finally seemed to recognize her too. Cameras snapped, but no one shouted. They waited. She raised her hand, not in warning, not in command, but in gratitude. "I didn't do this alone," she said. "You did." A woman near the front, a teacher judging by the ID lanyard, called out, "What now, Judge Monroe?" Danielle smiled. "Now we hold the line, and then we move it." By nightfall, the courthouse lawn was still full. And in the middle of it all stood Danielle, robe still buttoned, head held high, surrounded by the very people the system had once taught to fear this place. She had come to work that morning expecting to hold court. Instead, she had helped birth a movement. And this time, the verdict wasn't written in law books. It was written in legacy,